Genesis 7 commentary. I have to be honest about something as it relates to this chapter, and there's several other places in the Bible that are like this. When God destroys a whole bunch of people and just wipes them out, it's difficult for me. And as I think as anybody who reads this. Now, it's not a lack of trust on my part in that I think God's doing something wrong. I know ultimately that there are things that I'm not going to understand on this side, that when I get to the other side, God's going to show me some stuff, and I'm going to go, Not that God needs to justify himself to me, not that God has something to prove, but I have something to learn. And this is what the Bible says, I believe, when it says faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I trust God, and my faith is in God, but it's difficult when I read scriptures like this and watch God just slaughter everyone. To be fair, at least in this particular chapter, God makes it clear that there's nobody left that actually follows God. And so when you don't follow God, you take your life into your own hands. You know, it's a big bucket of stupid for you to believe that there's not a God to begin with. I mean, even if we can't agree who God is, it's a much more reasonable position to take when you say, I don't know who God is, I just know there's got to be something. That's a reasonable position. You have to literally be stupid to believe that there is no God. It's like looking at a house that's been built and saying that just happened. It's just not plausible. Forget possible. It's not plausible for a thinking human being to come to that conclusion, which is what's so ironic about the atheist movement, that they sort of put themselves forward as the ones who are the thinkers, the scientists, those who are in the intelligentsia. Well, guess what? You don't get stupider than thinking there's not a God. So, like I said, it's one thing to put yourself in a position where you're not sure who and what God is, but you know there's something, that there just has to be, than it is to take the position that there's nothing. But see, this becomes a little more pointed in later chapters for me. This chapter, I can see what God is doing here, and you know, in one sense, it makes total sense to me in that, you know, people have turned from God, they took their lives into their hands, and God executed judgment, of which he has every right to do. So the more I think about this particular chapter, the more I'm okay with it. It's just tough thinking about everybody drowning and dying all at once. Where I do have an issue that requires a lot of faith on my part, to just trust God. And I admit, in this one, I have an issue trusting God, as in later chapters, when God sends the armies of Israel in to kill every man, woman, boy, and girl in a particular area. I can understand the killing of the men and the women. I mean, that's what war is. You kill people when you're at war. I don't like war. I don't think that war is something that's fun or great or, oh, let's go to war. But when it's time for war, people are going to die. What I don't understand is the killing of the children. And in the interest of full disclosure, I have developed, in the last several years especially, such an affinity for children that it likely affects my ability to see this clearly. And so I have to be honest about that, both with myself and with anybody listening to this. It's a very, very difficult thing for me when children are killed, because they're just so innocent. I mean, and they can be reshaped, and even if the parents were horrible, they can be reshaped. They're children. God has his reasons for things, and this is one that I just don't get. I honestly do not have the ability to understand why children have to die. It's a difficult thing for me. So, but having said that, there's a competing thing in my own head. You know, if and this is going to be a very crude, non-scientific example, but the principle is accurate. Okay, so I get in advance, before I even say this, that comparing human life to this is completely different. But there is a parallel principle. You know, if I create something like a bike or a cabinet or a desk, you know, it's mine. I created it. I figured out how to make that work based on the physics around me, and how gravity works, and what holds the tabletop of the desk up, and how big the, you know, top should be based on the thing, you know, and it's mine. I own it. I have a right to keep it exactly as it is. I have a right to move it across the room, and I have a right to set it on fire and burn it, because it's mine. We are God's, and we belong to him, and He has a right to decide when our days start and when our days end. That is his prerogative. I just don't like it when he does it to children. But I do trust him. It's difficult, but I do trust him. The other really poignant thing from this particular chapter, I think, and perhaps most will say is the more important thing, I was just blabbering on about what kind of gets stuck in my craw, is Noah did not apparently go to the sea and build an ark on the beach, right? And then get ready for a flood. And he didn't build a boat. He built an ark. So capture those two things in your head. He built an ark, which, we cannot understand the massiveness of the ark, even if we were to see it today. Because we have so many cruise ships that are bigger than this now. And boats that make an ark look like something that only an ant could fit on, right? It dwarfs it. It dwarfs an ark, the stuff that we have today. But if you walk up to something the size of an ark even today, it is massive. And there's no question. I mean, when we compare it in our own heads to other boats that we see and whatever else, it doesn't seem quite so big. But if you just take it on its own, even today, if you walk up to it, and there's this new Ark Museum up north somewhere, I can't remember where it's at, that's supposedly built to the size of the actual Ark. It is utterly massive. So Noah was building how can we compare this today? Take today's largest boat, right? That requires a factory to build it, and that generally has to be built on the water because you can't build huge boats on dry land and then cart them off. You build them on the water, right? Because you drop them into the water as soon as they're built. I don't know the whole process, but the bottom line is you build big boats on the water. And then as soon as they're ready or until they reach the point where you can do so, you lower them onto the water. You don't drag them across dry land on, what do you call trailers. You don't drag, big boat. I'm talking like Carnival cruise ship type boats. You don't drag those around on a trailer or a tow truck. You build them on the water for a reason, because only an idiot would build a boat that big on dry land, because now you got to get it to the water. Noah didn't just build something the size of like one of our massive boats today. He did it by himself. And he built it on dry land. Do you know how stupid Noah looked to everybody around him the entire time? From the moment he picked up his hammer, all the way to and including the day he was done, because it didn't rain the day he was done. Well, I guess it did say like shortly after that, but at the moment he finished, it wasn't raining yet. People walking by going, "Oh, what you doing there, crazy man? Building a boat, huh? Building a freaking ark." What kind of faith does it take with everybody in the world calling you a moron, calling you an idiot, being derogatory, which is likely what happened? We don't really have a record of that in the Bible, but you gotta think. I mean, just common sense, inject that into the discussion. Here's a man that people probably thought was bona fide crazy town nuts, and didn't just build something larger than anything anyone had ever seen, but made it a boat and built it on dry land. I mean, there were so many things working against people viewing him as being sane. He's lucky he didn't do that today, or he'd have been locked up and Baker acted for at least 3 days the day he started the process. It's the kind of faith we have to have with God, that when he gives us something to do, and you better know it's God's voice, because you can get very disillusioned if you run off half-cocked, go to do something for God, fully believing he told you to do it, but he never had a part in it. You're going to be real disillusioned when you're done, because you're going to be thinking, God told me to do it, it fell apart, and so God's at fault. No, you missed God. Or maybe God did tell you to do something, and you thought it was for the purpose of one thing, and well, guess what? It was for something completely different. You better know that God's telling you to do something before you take on a task this big. But once you know, you better never quit when you take the task on. No matter who makes fun of you, no matter what derogatory things are said, no matter how demeaning people are to you, do not quit.